What if the man who could have ended World War 2 months earlier was stopped? Not by German guns, not by enemy strategy, not by the harsh terrain of Western Europe, but by a direct order from his own commanding general, a man he had known for decades, a man he simultaneously admired and resented with every fiber of his warrior soul. In the scorching summer of 1944, as the Allied armies poured across France in one of the most dramatic military surges in modern history, General George Smith Patton, Jr. stood at the edge of what he believed was the greatest opportunity of the entire war, a chance to smash through German defenses, cross the Rhine River, and potentially collapse the Nazi war machine before the leaves turned in autumn. He had his fuel. He had his men. He had momentum unlike anything the war had yet produced. And he had the absolute conviction of a man who believed destiny had placed him on this earth for exactly this moment. And then the order came. 48 hours. That was the limit Eisenhower's headquarters had imposed on Patton's advance east of the Seine River, a restriction born of logistics, politics, and a broader Allied strategy that Patton viewed not as wisdom, but as catastrophic timidity that would cost thousands of lives and months of brutal warfare. If this kind of story, where history pivots on the decisions of extraordinary, flawed, and fiercely human leaders, is the kind of story that makes your pulse quicken, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Subscribe right now. Hit that like button so more people can find this video. Share it with a friend who loves military history, and drop a comment below telling us what you already knew about Patton before pressing play. Because by the end of this, something will surprise you. The relationship between Dwight David Eisenhower and George Smith Patton was one of the most complex, layered, and consequential partnerships in American military history. A friendship forged in the peacetime army of the 1930s, tested by the fires of North Africa and Sicily, and stretched nearly to the breaking point in the fields of France. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe, was a political general in the finest sense of the word, a man gifted at managing enormous coalitions, soothing British pride, navigating Washington's expectations, and holding together an alliance that was, beneath its public unity, full of competing egos and national interests. Patton was the opposite in almost every measurable way, volcanic, impatient, theatrical, and convinced that war was won through speed, audacity, and the relentless pressure of an army that never gave the enemy a moment to breathe or reorganize. Eisenhower had rescued Patton after the infamous slapping incidents in Sicily in August 1943, when Patton struck 2 hospitalized soldiers he accused of cowardice, causing a scandal that nearly ended his career permanently. Eisenhower had shielded him, punished him privately, and then used him as a decoy during Operation Bodyguard, the elaborate deception campaign designed to convince the Germans that Patton would lead the main Allied invasion, which kept entire German panzer divisions frozen in place at Pas-de-Calais, while the real landings unfolded at Normandy on June 6, 1944. That deception had worked brilliantly, and now Patton was finally unleashed, given command of the newly activated 3rd United States Army on August 1, 1944, at a moment when the Allied breakout from Normandy, known as Operation Cobra, had already shattered the German front and sent enemy forces streaming eastward in open retreat. The breakout had been sparked by a devastating aerial bombardment on July 25, 1944, near Saint-Lô, France, a bombardment that unfortunately also killed 111 American soldiers through short drops of bombs, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater. But the breakthrough that followed was real, dramatic, and unprecedented. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group began pouring through the gap, and when Patton's 3rd Army became operational on August 1st, it inherited a situation of breathtaking potential. Within days, Patton's columns were racing across Brittany, his tankers covering distances in hours that traditional military thinking suggested would take weeks. By mid-August, 3rd Army had swept around the southern flank of the German position in Normandy, contributing to the encirclement of German forces in what became known as the Falaise Pocket, a catastrophe for the Wehrmacht that resulted in the destruction or capture of roughly 50 German divisions, with estimates of 10,000 Germans killed and 50,000 taken prisoner in the pocket itself between August 12 and August 21, 1944. Patton believed the pocket should have been closed tighter and faster, That hesitation at the Polish-Canadian line near Falaise had allowed tens of thousands of German troops to escape eastward, troops who would later be used to prolong the war. He was furious, and he was, by most historical assessments, correct. But the moment that crystallized everything, the clash that defined the Patton-Eisenhower tension in the summer of 1944, came as Third Army roared toward the Seine River and beyond. By late August 1944, Paris had been liberated. On August 25th, General Philippe Leclerc's 2nd French Armored Division entered the city, followed by General Omar Bradley and General Charles de Gaulle himself, in scenes of extraordinary emotion that the world watched with tears and relief. But Patton's eyes were not on Paris. They were fixed east, toward the Moselle River, toward the Rhine, toward the heart of Germany itself. His intelligence officers were telling him something electrifying, that the German army west of the Rhine was in a state of near-total collapse, that there were entire stretches of the front where organized resistance had ceased to exist, that if Third Army was given the fuel and the freedom to advance without halt, it could potentially reach the Rhine in days and cross it before the Germans had any chance to rebuild their shattered defenses. Patton put it in characteristically blunt terms in his diary on August 21st, 1944. "We have at this time the greatest chance to win the war ever presented. If they will let me move on with 3 corps, we can be in Germany in 10 days. He was not speaking metaphorically. He meant it literally, and the evidence on the ground supported him. And now, right here at the heart of this story, we ask you to pause for just a moment. If you find yourself gripped by what you're hearing, please subscribe to this channel, like this video to help it reach more history lovers around the world, share it with someone who would love this kind of deep dive storytelling, and leave a comment below telling us which part of the story shocked you the most. Your engagement is what keeps stories like this alive. The obstacle was not German steel. It was Allied logistics, specifically the staggering problem of fuel supply that became one of the defining strategic crises of the entire Northwest European campaign. The Allied armies had advanced so far, so fast, that their supply lines had been stretched to the absolute limit. The nearest major port was still Cherbourg, captured in late June, hundreds of miles to the rear. The famous Red Ball Express, the emergency truck convoy system established on August 25, 1944, was running thousands of vehicles around the clock to push gasoline, ammunition, and food forward to the advancing armies. But it was not enough. The system consumed enormous quantities of fuel simply to deliver fuel, a logistical paradox that Patton found maddening beyond endurance. Eisenhower faced an impossible calculation. He had multiple army groups, all demanding priority, all certain their sector was a decisive one, all commanded by generals of enormous ego and genuine military talent. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding 21st Army Group in the north, was pushing his own concept, a narrow, single thrust through the Netherlands toward the Ruhr industrial heartland of Germany, a plan that would eventually become Operation Market Garden in September 1944. Bradley wanted to advance on a broad front. Patton wanted to be unleashed on a knife's edge of pure momentum. Eisenhower, adhering to the broad front strategy approved by the combined chiefs of staff, made the decision that would haunt the rest of the campaign. He restricted advances, prioritized Montgomery's northern thrust, and on multiple occasions in late August and early September 1944, ordered Third Army's fuel allocations sharply reduced. Patton's response to the fuel cutoffs was a combination of insubordination, creativity, and outright fury that his subordinates witnessed with a mixture of awe and alarm. On August 30th, 1944, Third Army's tanks began running dry near the Meuse River. Patton, rather than halt, ordered his men to siphon fuel from trucks, from rear area vehicles, from any source imaginable, and press forward. He flew into Bradley's headquarters personally to argue, beg, and demand, describing in dramatic terms the open road to Germany that lay before him. Bradley was sympathetic but constrained by Eisenhower's directives. The 48-hour advance limits, restrictions placed on Third Army's forward movement while supply priorities were redistributed, felt to Patton like a death sentence for the war's momentum. He wrote in his diary on September 1st, 1944, with the controlled fury of a man watching history slip through his fingers, forced to halt for lack of gas. This is a crime. He believed, and many historians since have partially agreed, that Eisenhower's decision to slow Third Army while prioritizing Montgomery's operation in the north was one of the great strategic miscalculations of the war in Europe. The Germans, given time to recover, would rebuild the Siegfried Line, man the West Wall, and transform what could have been a rapid Allied victory into months of grinding attritional warfare through the autumn and winter of 1944. The confrontation reached its most intense point in early September 1944 when Patton, crossing the Moselle River against orders to halt and consolidate, essentially presented Eisenhower with a fait accompli. His forces were across, casualties had been taken to get them there, and pulling back would cost more lives than pressing forward. It was a gamble, and it was technically a defiance of operational directives, though Patton was careful enough in how he presented it to avoid an outright rupture with the Supreme Commander. Eisenhower, visiting the front on September 2, 1944, met with Patton and Bradley at Chartres, and the tension in the room was palpable. Patton argued passionately that he needed 400,000 gallons of fuel per day to continue his advance, that the opportunity was real, that German resistance was collapsing, that history would not forgive them for stopping now. Eisenhower listened, agreed that Patton's progress had been spectacular, but upheld his decision to maintain the broad front strategy and continue directing the bulk of available supplies northward toward Montgomery. Patton left the meeting barely containing his anger, writing afterward that he felt like a man watching a golden door swing shut. He would continue fighting. The Lorraine campaign, the battles around Metz and Nancy through September, October, and November 1944, but the electric momentum of August was gone, replaced by costly, grinding combat in terrain far less favorable than the open roads of France. The historical debate over who was right, Patton or Eisenhower, has never been fully resolved, and perhaps it never will be. Eisenhower's broad front strategy had genuine merits. It prevented any single German counterattack from cutting off and destroying an isolated Allied spearhead. It maintained pressure across the entire front, and it avoided the catastrophic risk of an overextended army collapsing through lack of supply. Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's attempt at a narrow thrust through the Netherlands in September 1944, failed disastrously at Arnhem, killing thousands of Allied troops and demonstrating precisely the kind of danger Eisenhower feared from single-axis advances. On the other hand, the evidence suggests that in late August 1944, the German army in the West was genuinely on the edge of total collapse. That Army Group B's commander, Field Marshal Walther Model, was desperate and nearly out of options, that the West Wall defenses were unmanned, and that a sustained Allied push could have reached the Rhine before October. The cost of not doing so was measured in the brutal Hurtgen Forest campaign, in the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, in tens of thousands of additional casualties on both sides, and in the prolongation of a war that might have ended months earlier. Patton never stopped believing he had been right. He died on December 21, 1945, in Heidelberg, Germany, from injuries suffered in a car accident near Mannheim just 12 days earlier, never having fired the post-war political and military shots he was clearly planning. He took his certainty with him, leaving the argument to historians, soldiers, and anyone who has ever wondered what might have been different if one general had simply been allowed to keep driving east. If this story moved you, if it made you see the war not just as battles and dates, but as a human drama of vision, ambition, constraint, and consequence, then now is the time to act on that feeling. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Like this video to push it toward others who deserve to hear it. Share it with someone in your life who loves history or military strategy. And leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most, whether it was Patton's defiance, Eisenhower's impossible calculations, or the terrifying possibility that the war's end hung on a 48-hour halt order. History is never just the past. It is a mirror, and in the face of George Patton, furious and fuel-starved on the banks of the Moselle, we see something eternal, the collision between the man who sees the moment clearly and the world that refuses to move fast enough to seize it.